After Hazel closed the internet cafe, she went down and unlocked a car parked aside. The car lights flashed. Hazel said, "Get in the car. In order to thank you, I will take you to a fancy restaurant to have a delicious meal." Gerald's eyes lit up, and some expectations rose in his heart. The car started moving forward. Somehow, Gerald found that the surrounding buildings were somewhat familiar. He examined closer and found that the area was actually near Cherry Garden. Of course, in Los Angeles, other than having breakfast outside, Gerald almost never went to a restaurant for the rest of the time. Usually, Irene and her mother wouldn't bring Gerald along when they went out to eat. They felt embarrassed. It was only on Thanksgiving when the family ate together, he would go to eat with them. Therefore, Gerald really didn't know what delicious food was near the Cherry Garden. Unknowingly, the car arrived at the gate of Cherry Garden. Hazel stopped the car. Gerald said in surprise, "The food you mentioned is at the gate of this community." "No. I got to deal with something first," Hazel said. Gerald looked towards the entrance of the Cherry Garden. There were already some people gathered there. A luxurious car was parked at the entrance, and a beautiful woman was standing in front of the car. She tried her best to keep a person from getting into the car. Hazel's car couldn't get through it while they blocked the way. "Adriel," Hazel said with a frown. Gerald naturally recognized that the person was Adriel, and the person who was dragging him was Irene. Irene looked a bit bedraggled right now. Her hair was a bit disheveled, and tears flowed down her face. "This playboy probably provoked another woman," Hazel said with a frown. Gerald looked at all of this without the slightest fluctuation of emotion in his heart. Hazel rolled down the window, and the voice from outside followed. "Adriel, you can't do this. You can't abandon me." "Outside," Irene cried. "It was you who took the initiative to chase me. In order to be with you, I have already divorced Gerald. I have nothing now. You really can't abandon me." Hearing this, Hazel was stunned. She looked at Gerald and said, "She just said Gerald, right?" Gerald did not think there was anything to deny. He nodded. "Yes, that woman is my ex. We got divorced a few days ago." Hazel was surprised. She subconsciously looked at Gerald. Gerald was speechless. Then he said, "Stop. My ex cheated on me, all right. But it was also an accident that I married her. Something happened before. During 3 years of marriage, I didn't even touch her hand." Ads by Pub Future. "Shut up." Hazel obviously did not believe what Gerald had said. Gerald didn't explain anything to her and continued to look outside. "I was the one who took the initiative to chase after you. Didn't you start off being aloof and indifferent toward me? Didn't you know how active you were after I drove my sports car to look for you that day?" Adriel said as he struggled free. "We have already broken up. Don't pester me anymore, all right? I already said that my family doesn't approve of this." "No, you can't dump me," Irene cried, holding Adriel's arm tightly. Adriel gritted his teeth and said, "You and I were together for money. I've given you quite a few bags during this period of time. With the things I gave your mother, it should be at least $16,000. That's enough." Seeing that more and more people were gathering around him, Adriel couldn't keep his face up any longer and forcefully pushed Irene. Irene's footsteps became unsteady, and she fell to the ground. Hazel frowned when she saw the scene and said, "Adriel is really an animal. He probably just wanted to have sex with her." As Hazel spoke, she looked at Gerald and said, "Aren't you going to take care of it?" Gerald shook his head and said, "It has nothing to do with me anymore. This marriage is a mistake, not to mention that we're already divorced." After pushing her to the ground, Adriel tidied up his clothes and roared at the bystanders, "What are you looking at? What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a breakup?" As Adriel spoke, he glanced at Irene, and Adriel's eyes flashed with a trace of unwillingness. Adriel only took a little advantage of Irene and did not successfully sleep with her. This girl is really pitiful. Yes, the playboys these days are really. The people next to Adriel were discussing. In the security booth, the security guard said to the crowd, "You think the girl is a nice person. Her ex-husband is also from our community. He is the one who goes home wearing tattered clothes every night. He works at the construction site. Later, she found a rich person and got divorced. She even drove her ex-husband out. I saw her mother scolding her ex-husband at the entrance of the community several times. I have to say people like her deserve it." On the side, the corner of Gerald's mouth twitched a few times. This fucking security guard had such a good memory. Gerald had indeed argued with Mary a few times at the entrance of the community, but he hadn't expected that the security guard would remember everything. Irene sat on the ground and cried. Adriel didn't care about her anymore. He got into the car, stepped on the accelerator, and drove off. Hazel looked at Irene, who was sitting on the ground, and asked with a frown, "You really don't wanna do anything about it? Let's drive. What are we going to eat?" Gerald said. Hazel frowned. She looked at Gerald and said, "You are so cruel. No matter what, she is your ex-wife, isn't she? If you knew how her family treated me when I married her, you wouldn't have said that," Gerald said. "Let's go." Seeing Gerald say this, Hazel did not say anything more. She started the car, and the car slowly moved forward. Because there was a traffic jam, the car couldn't move too fast. The car slowly drove past the gate of the community. Gerald sat inside and did not look at Irene, who was sitting on the ground. However, Irene, who was sitting on the ground, accidentally saw Gerald and was slightly stunned. She watched as Gerald drove past in front of her, and also saw Hazel driving in the car. After the divorce, Irene thought that she would live a better and rich lady life by marrying Adriel. And Gerald would still be the same Gerald who worked at the construction site. However, the situation after the divorce was completely different from what Irene had imagined. Adriel was different from what she had imagined, and now she had even lost Adriel. As for Gerald, he owed a company and became a rich man. The women with him, from Kira to the one in the car now, were no less beautiful than Irene. There was a huge gap in her heart. Looking at Gerald, who was far away, she got up, tidied up her hair, and ran to the community in a daze. Hazel drove for a while and found a parking spot on the side of the road. She took Gerald into a small alley next to them. "Is there a place to eat here?" Gerald asked in surprise. "Don't try to trick me." "Fuck off," Hazel scolded. "I have no interest in a married man like you. This is the house of the previous chef from Marriott Hotel. Now, the head chefs of Marriott Hotel are all his apprentices. After he retired, he would do some small business at home. However, because of his age and hand injury, he only cooks very few dishes every day. I brought you here to try my luck, so we might not be able to eat it," Hazel said. Gerald's eyes lit up. Marriott Hotel was indeed quite outstanding. The two of them walked around in the alley and soon arrived at a house. In the house, there were several wooden tables in the open. They were not luxurious, but they were clean. At this time, there were already some people in the house. "Audrey," Hazel suddenly spoke and exclaimed, "You're here too." The people in the house were Audrey, Doreen, and the other two people. Audrey turned around. When she saw Hazel and Gerald, she said with slight surprise, "Hazel, why are you with Gerald?" Doreen was a little surprised and did not say anything. Henley snorted coldly and said, "Why is Gerald always around?" Then, Henley took out his phone and sent a message to Fletcher with the location attached. "Gerald is here." In the house, a few wooden tables were placed. On one of the tables, 4 people were sitting around. It was Audrey, Doreen, Henley, and a girl dressed in a formal dress. Audrey looked at Hazel and asked in surprise, "Why are you with Gerald?" Hazel smiled and said, "He went to my internet cafe and happened to help me solve a problem. I wanted to thank him by taking him to Mr. Durden's to have a meal. I hope Mr. Durden can cook for us." As Hazel spoke, she looked inside and asked, "Where is Mr. Durden?" "We have just informed his disciple. Mr. Durden is still sleeping. He should be up now," Audrey said. Gerald was surprised and asked, "There are only a few of us here. We should be able to eat, right?" "Not necessarily," Hazel sighed. "Whether Mr. Durden is willing to cook or not depends on how much he likes us. If he is not, he will not do it. Moreover, he might like you this time. The next time he sees you, he might be unhappy again. He's such a weird man." Gerald was speechless. He thought to himself, "I feel that his temper is even weirder than those old men and women in Night Watch." Beside Gerald, Henley curled his lips and said, "Isn't he just a cook? As long as the money is enough, I don't believe he won't do it." After Henley finished speaking, the expressions of everyone changed slightly. Audrey hurriedly said, "Henley, don't speak nonsense. Mr. Durden is not the kind of person who craves money, and he does not lack money." Henley laughed, but he still acted accordingly and did not continue to speak. "I heard today that Audrey brought her friend here. I was prepared to give you a good meal." At this time, a loud voice sounded. Immediately after, an old man with gray hair and rosy cheeks pushed open the door from a room nearby. He was dressed in a white chef uniform. Beside him was a 30-year-old man. Although he was in such a normal house, his chef uniform was very clean and flawless. Audrey's expression changed slightly. She hurriedly said with a smile, "Kawing, this friend of mine doesn't know much about the rules here. Please don't bother with him." Kawing glanced at Henley and said coldly, "The store is not open today. Please go back." $8,000. At this time, Henley made a gesture of 8 and said lightly, "If you cook this meal, I can give you $8,000. Ads by Pub Future." Kawing suddenly turned his head and looked at Henley. Henley revealed a sneer on his face. He looked at Kawing's angry face and said again, $16,000. This idiot. Beside him, Gerald could not help but curse in his heart. In the mind of a rich man born with a silver spoon like Henley, no one in this world did not like money. Money could settle everything, and it only depended on whether or not it was enough. Audrey and Hazel frowned. Kawing trembled slightly when he heard Henley's words. $32,000. Henley continued to increase the value. At the same time, Henley looked at Gerald provocatively, as if saying, "Can you take out so much money? Kid, you are going too far." Kawing suddenly growled, turned around, and walked directly into the room. Next to him, the middle-aged man looked at Henley and said indifferently, "Mr. Durden has gone to rest. He won't open the door today, and he won't cook. Everyone, please go back. Moreover, everyone here today doesn't have to come to the small store to eat in the future. From today on, we will not receive any of you." As he spoke, he looked at Henley and said, "Young man, perhaps you are very rich, but in this world, there are many things that money can't buy. We dare not provoke all of your rich people, but we also have the right to choose whom to cook for." The expressions of Audrey and the others changed. Henley snickered and said, "Isn't he just a cook? Fine if he doesn't wanna cook for us. Let's go. It's the same if we go somewhere else to eat." Audrey and Hazel both frowned. Audrey glanced at Henley and said, "Henley, you are going too far." Hazel also sighed and said, "Gerald, let's go too. It seems this isn't our lucky day." Henley still looked indifferent. In his opinion, Kawing was too pretentious. Kawing was just a chef, but he didn't wanna cook for money. Perhaps, I have a way to get Mr. Durden to cook for us, at this time, Gerald suddenly said. Everyone frowned and looked at him. Henley sneered and said, he doesn't wanna make it for us even though I'm willing to spend $32,000. Just you. You were just a construction site worker in Los Angeles before. Are you planning to move a few bricks in his room? Doreen frowned slightly and looked at Gerald. Audrey hurriedly said, Gerald, forget it. Mr. Durden is already very disgusted with us. Don't cause trouble, okay? In any case, they have already said that they will never receive you in the future. The worst thing has happened, Gerald said. With a smile. By the way, I just saw that Mr. Durden's right hand was shaking. Did he get injured when he was young? When the middle-aged man at the door of the room heard Gerald's words, he frowned. Audrey sighed and said, yes, Mr. Durden used to be the head chef in one of the Michelin restaurants. Later, my father met him and became friends with him. After that, my father invited him to the Marriott Hotel. Marriott Hotel was one of the properties owned by the Herman family. With Mr. Durden's marvelous cooking skills, Marriott Hotel greatly branded its name and defeated our competitor, the McHale family at that time. So the McHale family chose to spend money to poach Mr. Durden. When Audrey said this, she smiled bitterly and said, Mr. Durden was naturally unwilling. Later, his right hand was injured, and he could no longer hold the kitchen knife. He was disheartened and chose to retire. He occasionally cooked in the small house. Gerald raised his eyebrows. Mr. Durden can't even hold a knife. He definitely can't lift the pot, Henley said disdainfully. I don't believe that he can make anything good. Audrey frowned and said, all the ingredients here are made by Mr. Durden himself, and then Mr. Klosky is the one who cooks. Mr. Hamish Klosky is Mr. Durden's best apprentice. As Audrey spoke, Henley looked at Hamish at the door. Hamish snorted and did not speak. Henley looked at Hamish with disdain, then looked at Gerald with a fake smile and said, didn't you say that we could eat again? Your question just made it worse. Gerald ignored Henley. He took a step forward and walked in front of Hamish. Gerald smiled and said in a voice that could only be heard by the two of them, are Mr. Durden's hands working normally in daily life? It's just that he can't exert any force. Once he exerts force, he doesn't feel any of his strength. Hamish looked at Gerald and asked, so what if you're right? You can go in and tell Mr. Durden that I have a way to restore his strength. Not to mention holding a knife. Even raising a knife and slashing people won't be a problem, Gerald said with a smile. Hamish was stunned at first, then sneered and said, since Mr. Durden was injured, we have checked countless hospitals in the country, including many famous doctors living seclusively. They have no way to solve it. They only heard of a method that has a chance to recover, but that method is too mysterious, basically impossible. The refreshing treatment, Gerald said calmly. As he heard this, Hamish's pupils suddenly shrank. He looked at Gerald and asked, how do you know? His condition is caused by the damage to his meridians. In terms of treatment, the refreshing treatment is naturally the most effective one, Gerald whispered. Hamish's facial expression kept changing. He looked at Gerald and said, do you know how? Of course, I don't, but I know someone who can. And I have full confidence that it can cure him, Gerald said with a smile. Hamish suddenly became angry. He looked at Gerald and said, you can't do it. Why should I believe you? Gerald smiled and said, the refreshing treatment. Most people probably don't know about this kind of thing. I've said its name. It means I know more. How about this? I came here with my friend today because we wanted to eat some dishes cooked by Mr. Durden. If you cook for us, I will call my friend now. I'll let him come over and examine Mr. Durden's condition. What do you think? Hamish's expression suddenly changed. He let out a breath and said, I need to ask Mr. Durden. After Hamish said that, he turned around and ran into the room. Gerald was very confident. He believed that Kawing wouldn't refuse him. Gerald could tell that Kawing loved cooking. Even though Kawing could no longer wield a knife with his right hand, he still ran a small restaurant here and received customers himself. Now that Gerald had given Kawing hope, no matter how small the hope was, he would definitely choose to try it. Gerald rubbed his nose and walked back into the alley. Audrey looked suspiciously at Gerald and asked, What did you say to him? Will he really cook for us? Gerald smiled and said, Hazel and I can eat the dishes he cooks today. As for you guys, I am not sure. Gerald was teasing Audrey. Audrey glared and said, What do you mean? You didn't tell him that we wanted to eat too. Gerald shrugged and said, Yes. Hazel and I didn't come here with you. You are too petty, Audrey said in annoyance. Beside her, Henley said disdainfully, You are boasting. I didn't convince him even with $32,000. I don't believe you can make him cook for you with a few words. Doreen, let's go. Don't wait here. As they talked, the door of the room opened again. Hamish walked to Gerald and said politely, Sir, Mr. Durden has agreed. It turned out that Henley was wrong. Gerald looked at Henley with a faint smile. Then he said to Hamish, Then I'll have to trouble you and Mr. Durden. Hamish nodded. He looked at Henley with disgust. If it were not for the chance to cure Kawing's hand, he would never have agreed to cook for someone like Henley. Wait a moment. Mr. Durden and I need to get prepared first. Please don't forget what you promised, Hamish said. Lightly. Ads by Pub Future. Gerald nodded and smiled, Don't worry. No problem. Hamish nodded. Then he turned and entered the room again. As for Kawing, he still hadn't shown up. After seeing them leave, Audrey said, Gerald, how did you do it? Mr. Durden really agreed to cook for us. I just told Mr. Durden that I know a doctor who can cure his hand, Gerald said with a smile. No way. Mr. Durden has turned to almost all the large hospitals and famous doctors in the country and abroad, but nobody can cure it. Audrey asked in surprise, You actually know such a doctor? Henley added, He lied. He will eat the meal first, and then he will run away. A person who had been in prison for a few years came out to work at the construction site and got to know a famous doctor. People would laugh their heads off. But it makes sense. You have been in prison for a few years. You must have got used to lying. If you think I lied, then don't eat the food later. Gerald looked at Henley and chuckled. Henley was stunned. Then he sneered and thought, Just laugh. Laugh hard. When the person that Fletcher called in arrives, I want to see if you can still laugh. Henley didn't continue to talk. He just wanted to find a way to expose Gerald's lie later. Gerald ignored him. He walked to the side, took out his phone, found Valerie's number, and called her. Yes, the doctor Gerald knew was naturally Valerie, the best doctor in the world. Soon, the call got through. Valerie was obviously still sleeping. When she heard Gerald's words, she said in a daze, Hey, I was sleeping. What are you doing? Gerald coughed and said, Well, Valerie, come to me. I met a patient here. Only you are the only one in the world that can cure him. Wait until I wake up, said Valerie. Don't. Saving a life means a lot, Gerald hurriedly said. Valerie hesitated for a while before sitting up. She said, Give me the address. Gerald breathed a sigh of relief. He hung up the phone and sent the address to Valerie online. Then he sat down. Doreen and the others had heard the content of his call. They looked at Gerald in surprise. Audrey said hesitantly, You really know a great doctor? Yes, the best doctor in this world. Gerald said casually. Henley smiled disdainfully. He did not think that Gerald could call in that doctor. At this time, a burst of aroma began to spread in the alley. Just smelling it gave one a good appetite. Gerald could not help but look forward to it. About 10 minutes later, at the entrance of the alley, Valerie was dressed in white with a medicine bag. The moment she appeared, both men and women couldn't help revealing shocked expressions. Henley, who was at the side, looked at Valerie and couldn't help but swallow. Hazel looked at the medicine bag on Valerie and swallowed. She asked, "Is she the doctor you invited?" At this time, Valerie had already walked over. She ignored the others. Valerie looked at Gerald and said indifferently, "Where is the patient? I'll take you to see him," Gerald said. As he spoke, he stood up and glanced at others. Then he led Valerie in the direction of the room. In the kitchen, Kawing and Hamish were busy. After Gerald gave a simple introduction, Valerie took Kawing's hand and looked at it. After a moment, she nodded and said, "You're right. The refreshing treatment can cure it." As she spoke, she let out a breath and said, "Arrange a quiet room for me. I will perform the treatment for you right now." When Kawing heard what Valerie said, his entire body couldn't help but tremble. Hamish looked at Valerie worriedly and asked, "Can you really cure him?" Gerald said indifferently, "The refreshing treatment can bring the dead back to life. In this world, there is only one person who can perform it now. And that's Drive Manning." Hamish said with a look of ecstasy, "Okay. I will arrange a quiet room for you now." Kawing said, "I will take Drive Manning there. You keep an eye on the kitchen here." Hamish nodded. He looked at Gerald and said, "Please wait in the alley. The dishes will be served soon." Gerald nodded and left the kitchen. After returning to the alley, Hazel quickly asked, "How is it?" "As I said, the doctor I invited is the best in this world. She can definitely handle it," Gerald said. Henley snorted coldly, obviously not believing Gerald's words. Gerald couldn't be bothered to say more and continued to wait. Another 10 minutes passed. Suddenly, the door to the room was pushed open. Hamish ran out of the room with an excited expression. His appearance shocked Audrey and the others. Henley said with a cold smile, "It's over. Gerald probably found a quack." Hamish found that he had been tricked and came to scold Gerald. Plop! Hamish suddenly ran to Gerald and knelt on the ground with a thud. "Mr. Klosky, what are you doing?" Gerald hurriedly went to help him up. Thank you very much. Mr. Durden's injury has troubled him for many years. You don't know how cruel it is for a chef to be unable to wield a knife. Just now, after Dr. Manning performed the treatment, Mr. Durden was able to raise a knife. Dr. Manning said that he would completely recover with a few more treatments." Hamish knelt in front of Gerald and said, Thank you very much." His eyes were red, and tears flowed down. Gerald hurriedly helped him up and said, "This is no big deal. If you really want to thank someone, you should thank Drive Manning. I've just helped a little." Beside him, Audrey and the others were stunned. This scene clearly meant that the doctor Gerald called in had really cured Kawing Durden's hand. "You actually know a top doctor so gorgeous," Audrey said in shock. Audrey and Hazel looked at Gerald in surprise. Now, Gerald looked so mysterious to them. They just realized that they did not know Gerald at all. While they were talking, Valerie walked out of the room with a medicine kit on her back. Her expression was still cold. At this time, Hamish had already been helped up by Gerald. He sniffed and wiped his tears. He said, "Wait a moment. All the dishes are almost ready to serve. Right on the way." As Hamish spoke, he walked over to Valerie and thanked her repeatedly. Valerie's expression was still calm. She only nodded. Then she walked over to Gerald and said, "I ran into a few little hooligans at the door. I helped you get rid of them. They said that they received the order from Fletcher." Gerald's eyebrows slightly moved. Henley looked a little weird after hearing Valerie's words. What's Fletcher's problem? His men were handled by a doctor, a female doctor. Henley cursed in his heart. Gerald nodded and said, okay. Sit down and eat a little. Valerie looked at him coldly and said, I am not in the mood. You have disturbed my sleep. We will deal with this problem when you go home. When Valerie said that, the others were stunned. Deal with the problem when he goes home. Does it mean Gerald lives with this beautiful doctor? Doreen looked a little surprised, and then she became calm again. Audrey, on the contrary, asked curiously, beautiful doctor, do you and Gerald live? Before Audrey finished her sentence, Valerie glanced at her indifferently. With a cold snort, Valerie turned and left. During the whole process, Valerie did not speak to anyone except Gerald. Audrey felt embarrassed. Gerald smiled. He knew Valerie so well. He did not say anything and only smiled as he looked at Henley. When Gerald came over, no one followed him. If anyone followed him, he would have discovered it long ago. But now that Fletcher's men came here, there was only one possibility. Henley had informed Fletcher that Gerald was here. Ads by Pub Future. Henley didn't say anything after several slaps in the face. He just sat there with a long face. At this time, dishes began to be served. Gerald picked up the fork and tasted it. His eyes couldn't help but narrow. Wow, it's so delicious. It's really delicious, Audrey said exaggeratedly. Yes, it was indeed very delicious. Gerald had eaten a lot of delicacies in his life, but this meal was undoubtedly the most delicious he had ever eaten. Doreen's eyes flashed. After a moment, she turned to Gerald and said, Gerald, is that doctor really the best doctor in the world? Gerald frowned at the question. He nodded and answered, I think so. What's wrong? Doreen gritted her teeth and looked at Henley next to her. She did not explain anything and continued to eat. Gerald knew that she didn't want to say too much in front of Henley. Henley was a problem. Gerald glanced at Henley and continued to eat. At the same time, in Cherry Garden, Irene's home. Irene sat on the sofa with blank eyes. Beside her, Mary was holding a bowl of gravy. She looked at Irene and said, Irene, you have to eat something. Vivian supported her from the side and said, yes, Irene, eat something. What's so good about Adriel? With your body and look, you can easily find someone better than him. Irene's tears were still flowing down her cheeks. After a while, she suddenly raised her head, looked at Mary, and said, Mom, I regret it. Huh? Mary asked confusedly, for what? I regret divorcing Gerald. Irene wiped her tears. Mary sighed and sat down by Irene's side. Regret. Mary regretted it, too. In the past, Gerald was obedient to them. He would do whatever they asked him to do. In the past 3 years, he was no different from their family's servants. He would even hand over a penny. And now, he had become the boss of a company. He was rich. If he and Irene had not divorced, his company would belong to Mary and Irene too. Vivian felt the same. The person working at the construction site with Gerald directly became Vivian's boss after Gerald bought the company. His annual salary was now $160,000. If Gerald and Irene did not divorce and Vivian could treat Gerald better back then, maybe Vivian would be the HR director now. Vivian sighed quietly. It had only been a few days since the couple divorced, but everything had changed so dramatically. I want to get back together with Gerald, Irene said as she wiped her tears. Huh? Both Mary and Vivian looked at her confusedly. I want to win him back, Irene said firmly. At the same time, in a villa in Los Angeles, a middle-aged man was holding a toy in his hand and playing with a child. He had a kind smile on his face. However, he was definitely not a kind person. In Los Angeles, his name was famous. He was Gideon, Decker's uncle. Radiance Bar's boss. Knock, knock. There was a sudden knock on the door. The nanny quickly went to answer it. At the door, Decker and Jaydan were standing there. Seeing the two guests, Gideon quickly stood up and walked over to Jaydan. He said politely, "Mr. Croak." Jaydan sneered and said, "Gideon, you said that if I come to Los Angeles, nobody can mess with me." Gideon looked at Jayden's bruised face and frowned. "Let's go to my study." In the study, Decker gave a detailed account of what happened. He gritted his teeth and said, "Gideon, we had to do something. I can accept he slapped me, but he hit Mr. Croak. That bastard. We should. Pa." All of a sudden, Gideon raised his hand and slapped Decker's left cheek. Decker was stunned and looked at Gideon in shock. "I told you that you should keep away from him. He already forgave what you did. Why did you go to mess with him again? Why don't you listen to me?" Gideon roared angrily. Beside him, Jaydan frowned and said, "Gideon, I think Decker did not do anything wrong. That brat is Bradley's man. What's there to be afraid of? I will talk to Bradley." Jaydan looked at Gideon and continued, "You are being so lame. Now you are even afraid of a young man." As Jaydan spoke, he stretched out his hand and revealed a small tattoo on his arm. Seeing the tattoo, Gideon suddenly changed his look. Then he gritted his teeth and said, "Mr. Croak, what do you want to do?" Jaydan grinned and said, "I want that woman. I want that brat to kneel in front of me and watch me and that woman doing it." On the other side, in a slightly strange atmosphere, the dinner slowly came to an end. On the table, Audrey and Hazel looked curiously at Gerald. The appearance of Valerie made Gerald even more mysterious in their hearts. Audrey wondered if Gerald had found a doctor for her father and saved him. But Hazel thought Gerald was too strange. Gerald had been cowardly before, but he had acted tough in the cybercafe just now. When he had been in trouble, he had just divorced and was living with an extremely beautiful doctor. He was simply too odd. Henley lowered his head. Although the meal was delicious, he still had no appetite. Henley failed to persuade Carving, but Gerald succeeded. Henley was quite unhappy, but Doreen and Penny were quiet and ate in small mouthfuls. In the strange atmosphere, the dishes on the table were rapidly decreasing. Finally, Henley felt it was time for him to show off. He waved his hand and said, "Can we have the check, please?" Audrey quickly said, "Henley, you came to Los Angeles for me. How can you pay?" "Let me do it. How can I ask a lady to pay? We guys will split the bill." He smiled at Gerald and said, "I am not wrong, right?" Gerald. When Henley had just arrived, he had heard Audrey say that although Carving did not cook much because of his hand injury, the price was actually quite high. A meal cooked by Carving would cost at least $500 per person. So, this meal would cost over $1,600. This price was not much different from the top floor of the Marriott Hotel. Of course, the taste was definitely worth the price. But Henley knew Gerald's salary was not high, so this was quite a big sum of money for Gerald. Gerald curled his lips and ignored Henley. When Henley noticed Gerald's silence, he became more arrogant. Henley smiled. "Oh, my bad. I forgot you were no longer a member of the Kenneth family. Now you are working at the construction site. It is a bit difficult for you to pay half of the bill. I will pay for this meal. Ads by Pub Future." As he spoke, he looked at Gerald and said, "Come to think of it, Gerald, the construction job must be tiring for you. Why don't I introduce you to a new job? You can go back to Sacramento with us. Our family has clout in Sacramento, so it is not a problem to give you a new job. But because you went to jail, I can't give you a decent job." Henley smiled and said, "How about you working at my company as a security guard or a cleaner? Of course, the salary will be higher than your current job. It's $3,200 a month. It should be a lot higher than your salary at the construction site. Henley's words made the others frown slightly. No matter what, Gerald worked hard to get this meal. They all knew Henley said that only to humiliate Gerald, and Gerald could not work at his company. Gerald looked up at Henley and said indifferently, "Did I ever say I wanted you to give me a new job?" Henley frowned and said, "I was just being kind. Since you are not willing to accept it, then forget it. Waiter, I want to pay the bill. How much is it?" At this time, Hamish walked out and said politely to Gerald, "Mr. Durden wanted to express his gratitude for your help. So, this meal will be free. In the future, if you want to eat here, you won't ever have to pay." Hearing that, Audrey and Hazel both revealed looks of envy. Audrey quickly said, "Gerald, you must bring me with you next time you come." Gerald smiled, stood up, and said, "Then I will thank you and Mr. Durden." After exchanging a few words of courtesy, the group of people walked out of the alley. Audrey asked, "We plan to go to Fragrance Mountain. Do you want to come with us?" Fragrance Mountain was another tourist attraction in Los Angeles. "I don't mind. I have nothing to do in the afternoon anyway," Hazel said. Then they looked at Gerald. Henley frowned, obviously not wanting to bring Gerald along. "I have something to do in the afternoon." Gerald said, "I won't go." Henley breathed a sigh of relief and thought, "At least you are sensible." Gerald thought for a moment and whispered in Hazel's ear, "Be careful when you go out to play." There were two reasons he said that. One was that Blood Lotus would probably attack Audrey. The other was that Decker and Jaydan might cause trouble for Hazel again. Of course, the Night Watch had definitely sent people to guard Audrey in secret. Hazel was relatively safe with Audrey and the others. After the group left, Gerald walked toward home. Just as he reached the entrance of the community, Gerald's phone rang. He picked up his phone and saw that it was Irene. He was happy. Irene actually called him at this time. When he had been at the entrance of the community, he had seen it. He smiled and picked up the phone, saying calmly, "Hello, Gerald." Irene said with a little sob, "Where are you? I want to see you." "You shouldn't. Didn't I tell you I had nothing to do with your family? Your father saved my life, and I took care of you for 3 years. I gave you a house, so we don't owe each other anything," Gerald said indifferently. "No, I have something to tell you." Irene's voice was still choked as she said, "I have already gone out. Let's make an appointment. How about the cafe at the entrance of the community?" "There's nothing to talk about," Gerald said. After that, he hung up the phone. Then he turned around and walked into the community. Just as he turned around, he saw Irene coming out. Her eyes were red, and she also saw Gerald. Then she quickly ran over. Gerald frowned and looked at Irene, who was approaching him. "If you have anything to say, just say it here. After you're done, let's not see or talk to each other again." Irene pursed her lips and said, "Gerald, I broke up with Adriel. He's a scumbag." Gerald laughed and said, "Actually, you are quite like your mother. It's a pity you two broke up. Now both of you have to hurt other people." Irene was shocked for a moment, then lowered her head, and said, "I know you must hate us very much. Only after losing you, did I realize I should have cherished you. In the past 3 years, my mother and I, as well as my family, have hurt you." At this point, she pursed her lips and raised her head. "Gerald, after the divorce, you still stayed by my side. You even rented a house in the cherry garden just to be closer to me. You must still like me, don't you?" Gerald was annoyed. His living in the cherry garden was purely a coincidence. It was just that Valerie and the others rented a house here. "Okay, it's not what you said." Gerald pursed his lips. Irene gritted her teeth again and said, "Gerald, let's get married again. I will definitely be good to you this time. I won't overthink things." Let's live a good life as a couple. As long as you are willing, I can give myself to you tonight. Didn't you always complain about never touching my hand even after 3 years of marriage? At night, you can do whatever you want with me. Let's have a child together. Stop. Gerald quickly waved his hand and said. Irene suddenly burst into tears. She looked at Gerald and said, Gerald, I really have nothing left. Even you want to abandon me. At the entrance of the cherry garden, Irene's hair was a bit messy, and her face was covered with tears. She looked at Gerald with a pitiful appearance. A few days ago, she had been high and mighty with a look of disdain while facing Gerald. In just a few days, her attitude was completely different. This was reality. I have nothing now. Even you want to abandon me. Irene looked at Gerald and said in a pleading tone. Gerald had goosebumps on his body. It was fine when other girls said those words, but when Irene said them, he felt uncomfortable. Stop it, Gerald calmly said. Our marriage was a mistake. Back then, I lost my memory. In order to repay your father's kindness, I didn't disobey him and married you. Moreover, it was fake. Yes, their marriage was a mistake. If Gerald had not lost his memory, he would not have liked a superficial and vain girl like Irene. If Irene and Mary had been like normal women in these 3 years, perhaps it would have been fine. However, the mother and daughter were truly annoying. Second, I think you know how you treated me in the past 3 years. I have repaid the kindness. The moment I signed the divorce agreement, we were done, Gerald said indifferently. Third, although our marriage was fake, you still cheated on me. I won't take revenge on you, but I won't let you hurt me again. You found out that I was rich, and Adriel doesn't want you anymore, so you want me back. But I won't get back together with you. I won't be the second choice of a woman like you. Gerald's tone was flat. His words were not unpleasant to hear, but they were true. Irene cried and said, I know. I didn't cherish you. I was greedy, and I really knew I was wrong. Can you give me another chance? Gerald said indifferently, I'll leave the house to you. It's absolutely impossible between us. That's all. You should take care of yourself. Today, I'll make things clear for you. From today onwards, I'll draw a clear line. In the future, I won't interfere with your lives, and you can't come looking for me, either, especially your mother. If she goes to my company to cause trouble again, don't blame me for being rude. He knew Mary too well. Now that Adriel had abandoned Irene, they had no source of money. Mary would definitely come to the ads by pub future company to cause trouble for money or remarriage. Irene was stupefied. She, Mary, and women guessed that Gerald definitely still liked her. But Gerald was being decisive. Irene smiled bitterly in her heart and thought, he knows women as beautiful as me now. He is also rich. He can definitely find women better than me. He definitely doesn't like me anymore. Gerald ignored her and felt he had said enough. He did not want to have anything to do with her family anymore. He then turned back to the community. Irene stood at the entrance of the community blankly. Looking at Gerald's back, she was in a daze. Over the past few days, her world had been turned upside down. Did she regret it? She truly did. Feeling empty, she walked home in a trance. Gerald did not mind. He returned home and opened the door. He found Macy and Valerie eating in the dining room. Gerald asked, in surprise, shouldn't you be sleeping? Valerie glanced at him indifferently and said, I was woken up by you. I couldn't sleep when I came back. I wanted to save lives, Gerald coughed and said. Valerie coldly snorted, then raised her head, and said, right, those two little hooligans said they were Fletcher's men. How did you offend him? Gerald laughed bitterly and told her about how Audrey let him take the blame. After hearing that, Valerie said with a faint smile, You have quite a lot of women around you. You pretended to be Kira's and Audrey's boyfriend. Alas, I have no choice. I am too outstanding. I feel troubled that I can always attract the women's attention, Gerald chuckled. Bah, Macy said. Valerie looked up at Gerald and did not argue with him. Instead, she said, since Audrey said she was your girlfriend, it fits the suggestion I gave you. You will come to her as her husband and protect her. With you around, I, Macy, and the others can leave first. Don't. There are many ways to ensure her safety. For example, being her bodyguard, working at her company, and so on, Gerald said. A hint of a smile appeared on the corners of Valerie's mouth. All right, I will talk to Bradley later and then arrange for you to go to their company to work. As for your position, Bradley will arrange it for you. You will take orders from Audrey. Didn't you say Red Rose came to Los Angeles? I hope that when we meet next time, you can bring her head to meet us. Gerald frowned and said, you are leaving. Valerie and Macy nodded. The mission here is too long. Blood Lotus is secretive. We have other things to do. Since you have recovered and are in the dark, you are enough. Then she muttered, in short, try not to expose your identity. You will be our trump card. Gerald frowned and then let out a sigh. All right. Valerie looked at Gerald and frowned. Also, be careful this time. Don't lose yourself again. In addition, didn't you plan to go to Sacramento to settle some old scores? Yes. Gerald nodded. I do plan to do that. Audrey is the only mission in Los Angeles. If nothing unexpected happens, it will be over. All right. After going over, find the whereabouts of Watchman No. 2. Valerie looked up and said. Gerald was slightly surprised and asked, have you found traces of Watchman No. 2? 3 years ago, Watchman number 2 and Gerald had gone to Los Angeles for a mission. At that time, Watchman number 7 had died in battle, and Watchman number 2 had gone missing. Gerald had lost his memory. Valerie shook her head. It's just some clues. I just received news that 2 corpses were found in Sacramento. From the Mo, it was Watchman No. 2. Gerald said in surprise. Were they normal people? I don't know, Valerie said. In short, after you arrive in Sacramento, check it out when you have time. Watchman number 2 only trusts you. Gerald let out a breath and said, I understand. Valerie thought for a moment and then warned him, right, to save some trouble, I will help you deal with Fletcher. How? Gerald asked in surprise. Make his family go bankrupt, Valerie said calmly. Gerald was shocked. However, judging from Carving's episode, Fletcher and his family were extremely cruel when it came to business. This kind of businessman should be punished. It was easy for the Night Watch to bankrupt the McHale family. As she spoke, Valerie put down her fork, stood up, looked at the time, and said, their car should be arriving soon. You will clean up later. Macy and I have to go. Gerald nodded and said, I'll see you out. Macy froze, and then her face revealed a trace of embarrassment as she said, it's better if you don't. Why? Gerald asked in surprise. Macy pursed her lips and said, Watchman number 0 is here to pick us up. Gerald narrowed his eyes slightly. The Night Watchman, this mysterious organization in America, had combat power that surpassed ordinary people. And Watchman No. represented the strongest combat power of this organization. Gerald entered Night Watch at the age of 18 and became Watchman No. at the age of 21. From then on, No. was always him until he lost his memory and disappeared. Watchman No. could not be empty, so some naturally other people took his place. Currently, Gerald did not join in the organization formally, and he had also not redetermined his combat ability. Thus, Watchman No. was not him yet. Now, this new Watchman No. had come to Cherry Garden to pick up Valerie, Macy, and a series of watchmen in Los Angeles. As she said this, Macy revealed a hint of embarrassment on her face. You have not been here for 3 years. Watchman no. Oh, can't be empty, and there is no way to keep it for you. Gerald smiled and rubbed her head. What are you thinking? I don't care so much about this title. If it belongs to me, I will definitely get it back myself. But, at this point, his expression changed. You have withdrawn from Los Angeles this time and sent Watchman no. 0. You should be going to carry out a relatively difficult task, right? Watchman no O is not enough. You even bring drive. Manning. Valerie looked up at him but did not say anything. I won't ask. In short, be careful. If there is any danger, contact me immediately. I will be there as soon as possible. Gerald looked at Valerie and said seriously. Valerie sighed and said, You too. All the watchmen in Los Angeles will withdraw. You are the only one. Be careful. Gerald grinned and sneered, I can't wait for all the people of Blood Lotus to come over. I can solve them all at once. These bastards. Valerie knew Gerald's level and did not say anything more. She returned to her room and dragged a suitcase out. She said, Then let's go. Gerald let out a breath and got up to go downstairs. Several cars were parked in front of the entrance of the Cherry Garden. At the front was a silver-white Land Rover off-road vehicle. At the door stood a young man with a crew cut and a cheap black vest. And he wore a pair of beach shorts and a pair of flip-flops. He looked 24 or 25 years old. His skin was dark and he was not tall. Ads by Pub Future. If it was any other time, one would think that this person was a sloven idiot. But when he leaned against the luxurious Land Rover, everyone looked at him differently. This person was the current watchman no. Truston Beck. He stood at the door and waited quietly. There was a trace of expectation in his eyes. In Cherry Garden, Gerald was dragging the 2 big suitcases of Valerie and Macy out. He said with a surprised expression, You said that this new watchman no. has only joined night watch for 3 years. Less than 3 years, Macy said. He joined us before you disappeared, but you probably haven't seen him before. Just like you, he also rose rapidly. Now, he became watchman no. His rise speed is even faster than yours. Gerald nodded. In less than 3 years, he became watchman no. This speed was indeed a bit faster than his. In fact, Gerald spent 3 years and 17 days becoming watchman no. Ah, it's a little interesting. Gerald grinned. Soon, they arrived at the entrance of the Cherry Garden. At the entrance, Truston quickly greeted them. He ignored Valerie and Macy and walked to Gerald. He stared at Gerald and said, You are Gerald. Gerald nodded and said, You must be Truston, right? The current watchman no. Truston had a proud look on his face as he said, Yes, I am. Gerald looked at him up and down. He was secretly surprised. This person really did not look like an expert. His attire was even more indescribable than Gerald's. What a pity. If there are not too many people, I want to fight with you, Truston said. Although I became watchman no, there are still many people in Night Watch who feel that I am not your match. I think that I should tell them that Night Watch is already my world. When Gerald heard this, his eyebrows twitched slightly, and then he touched his nose and said, In fact, they are not wrong. You really can't beat me, is that so? Truston revealed an eager expression. Are you going to tear down this door? Valerie glared at Gerald and said, All right, you can go back. We are leaving. Remember what you promised me. Don't let any accidents happen in Los Angeles. Gerald nodded. However, Truston curled his lips and said, Unfortunately, the next time we meet, I will beat you severely. The next time we meet, I'm afraid you will become no. 1. Gerald sighed and said. Valerie felt that if they continued to talk, They might start fighting at the entrance. She hurriedly dragged the suitcase and walked towards the car. Trustin took a deep look at Gerald and then returned to the car. The car started and a line of 4 or 5 cars slowly drove away from Los Angeles. After watching the car leave, Gerald also rushed home. Just as he returned home, Bradley called. "Hello." Gerald picked up the phone. "Hello, Gerald. Dr. Manning just called me and told me," Bradley said politely. "This time, I have to trouble you again." "This is just what I should do," Gerald said with a smile. "The position I arranged for you is the assistant of the vice president. Right now, Audrey is the vice president of our company. However, she is not in charge of some important projects. It is just a sinecure for you," Bradley said. "As for the salary, how much do you think is appropriate for me to give you? How about giving you 5% of the shares?" Gerald did not refuse. He would not protect them for nothing. Night watch had no requirements. After all, watchmen had to take care of their own family. In the past, when Gerald was carrying out missions, he had his own shares in many large companies. 5% of the shares wasn't too much, but of course, it wasn't too little either. "I have no problem with that." Gerald nodded. "Okay. Then come to the company tomorrow morning. You can come to me directly. I will take you to the personnel department to register," Bradley said. Gerald nodded and hung up the phone. The next day, Gerald slept until 10 o'clock before he got up. After a simple breakfast, he slowly took the subway and rushed to Bradley's company. Soon, he arrived at the company and went straight to the reception. A beautiful girl saw Gerald and her eyes lit up slightly. She clearly recognized him. She smiled sweetly at Gerald and said, "Ah, you here to find Ems Herman?" Gerald asked in surprise. "You know me." The receptionist smiled teasingly. "Everyone in the company knows you. You are Ems Herman's boyfriend." Gerald was speechless. When he came here last time, Audrey had publicly announced that he was her boyfriend. At that time, many people were recording videos. Maybe after the video was finished, it was spread wildly in the company's internal chat rooms. Gerald scratched his head and said, "All right." The receptionist smiled at him again. She picked up a card from the counter and handed it to Gerald. She said, "You can go in with this card." Gerald nodded. Just as he was about to go get the card, a figure appeared. He grabbed the card and shouted, "What's going on with you? Why did you put a random person into the company? If the company's things are stolen, can you bear the responsibility?" Mr. Stewart." The girl hurriedly lowered her head and said, "But he seems to be Ems Herman's boyfriend." "Boyfriend? Why didn't I know that Audrey had a boyfriend?" Reed Stewart shouted in a low voice. Gerald looked at him. The person in front of him was slightly taller than him. He was quite handsome. His suit was straight and he looked young and promising. Seeing that Gerald was looking at him, Reed sneered and said, "If you want to find someone, go wait outside the door. Our company is not a place for idle people to enter. Don't you know what kind of person you are? Do you think that you are worthy of? Audrey is such a loser." The office building of Forever Group was the largest in Los Angeles, and it was exclusive to Forever Group. As the richest man in Los Angeles, Bradley's companies were all over Los Angeles and in many kinds of industries, and there were a lot of employees in his companies. At this time, on the first floor of Forever Group, Gerald was wearing an old t-shirt and a pair of ordinary shorts. He even wore a pair of worn sports shoes. Although he had regained his memory, Gerald had never bought new clothes. He ignored this matter. His clothes were bought when he was with Irene before, and most of them were cheap things. Next to Gerald, Reed, the handsome sales manager of Forever Group, sneered at Gerald and said, "Go outside and wait." When You enter the building of our company, the company has been lowered by you. The clothes of our company's security and cleaning employees are better than yours. With your appearance, Audrey can fall for you. You are really ridiculous, Reed said disdainfully. In the past 3 years, Gerald had heard this kind of word countless times. He was already used to it. He shrugged his shoulders indifferently, looked at the receptionist, and said, "Did you hear that? He asked me to leave. I'm not leaving, voluntarily." Huh. The girl was stunned. Reed was considered a young and promising person in Forever Group. He graduated from overseas as a master's degree candidate and came to Forever Group. In a few years, he became the sales manager. His ability was extremely outstanding. Although he had never revealed it publicly, everyone in the company knew that he liked Audrey. The scandal between Gerald and Audrey made him very unhappy. When Gerald appeared, he revealed a terrifying hostility. Reed thought that Gerald was a coward and did not even dare to refute him. He sneered, "I said it. What's wrong? Hurry up and go out." Gerald took out his phone, found Bradley's phone number, and dialed it. Reed frowned and then sneered, "Even if Audrey is here, you can't go in the company today." Gerald ignored him. His call was quickly picked up. On the phone, Bradley said, "Hello, Gerald, are you here? Just asked the receptionist for a card and you can come in. There is no way to do this job." Gerald sighed and said, "There is a guy downstairs who said that my clothes are too tattered and will affect the image of your company. He wants to kick me out. Since I haven't woken up yet, I will go home and sleep first." Ads by Pub Future. "What?" Bradley hurriedly said. "Gerald, don't be angry. I will immediately deal with this matter." Bradley knew the existence of Night Watch and he was being targeted. Previously, Valerie had told him that all the watchmen had retreated. Audrey's safety was almost entirely dependent on Gerald. Although Bradley had arranged some bodyguards for Audrey, he knew that the level of the bodyguards he had hired was too low compared to Gerald. Now, someone had provoked Gerald. If Gerald refused this job, what if something happened to Audrey? Thinking of this, Bradley was so angry that he said again, "Wait a moment. I am already at the elevator door." Gerald smiled and said, "Okay, I will wait for you." As he spoke, he hung up the phone and looked at Reed with a smile. Reed sneered, "Finished. So, I said that even if Audrey is here today, you can't step into this building." Gerald smiled at him and walked to a sofa in the hall. Seeing that Gerald was still not leaving, Reed walked over and glared at him. "I asked you to leave the building. Do you not understand? Why should I listen to you?" Gerald raised his eyes and asked. "Because I am the manager of the sales department of Forever Group. I am the manager of Forever Group with an annual salary of $160,000. Is that enough?" There was a hint of arrogance in his tone. "Oh," Gerald said indifferently, "if I didn't know, I would have thought that you were Bradley. How can you call Mr. Herman's name?" Reed glared at him. "Reed, what are you doing?" At this time, a loud shout suddenly sounded in the hall on the first floor. As the voice fell, the entire first floor fell into silence. Everyone looked towards the elevator entrance. Bradley was running out. In anger, "Mr. Herman! Mr. Herman!" In an instant, many people bowed their heads and greeted him. Bradley did not say much. Under everyone's shocked eyes, he passed through the hall and walked to the sitting Gerald. Then he bowed and said, "Gerald, I did not discipline my people well enough. Don't be angry. I will handle it well." Reed was a little stunned. He had always felt that Gerald was a random person that Audrey had caught just to brush off Fletcher. Audrey might know him, but he definitely could not be Audrey's boyfriend. Also, even if Gerald was Audrey's boyfriend, Bradley was his future father-in-law, so Bradley would not lower his head and Apologize to him. At that moment, Reed felt his mind go blank. At this time, Bradley raised his head and looked at Reed. Mr. Herman, I see that his attire does not match our company. Reed was a little incoherent. You have been working in our company for so many years. How can you judge people by their appearance? Bradley looked at Reed and said angrily, from today on, you will be withdrawn from the position of sales manager and go to the branch company. Reed's expression suddenly changed. He was now the sales manager of the head company. If he went to the branch company, this was a continuous demotion. Now, apologize to Gerald immediately, Bradley said with a dark face. Reed's face was gloomy. Quote, because of Gerald, Bradley wanted to demote him. Why aren't you apologizing? Do you want to pack your things and get lost? Bradley said in a low voice. Reed gritted his teeth and walked to Gerald. He bowed and said, Mr. Kenneth, I am sorry. I shouldn't judge you by your clothes. It was my fault just now. I hope you can forgive me. Bradley also looked at Gerald. It could be seen that Bradley did not want this person to leave. In other words, Reed should be quite capable. Gerald waved his hand and said, you decided on it. Bradley breathed a sigh of relief. He gave Reed a fierce look and then took Gerald to the elevator. When Gerald and Bradley disappeared in the elevator, Reed sat down on the sofa and looked miserable. Beside him, the people who were watching the scene were all stunned. They began to be curious about Gerald's identity. When they entered the elevator, Bradley saw that Gerald was not angry, and then he breathed a sigh of relief and said, I may have to trouble you next. My daughter has been spoiled by me, and she is very curious about you. Maybe. It's fine. Gerald smiled and said. Bradley smiled, then tilted his head, and asked, right, last time Audrey said that you were her boyfriend, and I was quite satisfied with you. Why don't you make it true? Audrey is beautiful. Although her temper is not very good, you might feel it quite interesting. Gerald was speechless. This old fellow seemed to be afraid that his daughter would not be able to get married. He did not speak. Bradley took him to the Human Resources Department to apply for a job, and then took him to Audrey's office. Bradley knocked on the door and pushed it open. Audrey was sitting on the chair in the office. She wore a pair of glasses and was dressed in business wear. Her hair was loose, just like when Gerald first saw her. There was a hint of coldness and understanding. Audrey, I have brought you your assistant, Bradley said. Audrey put down the file in her hand and looked up. When she saw Gerald, her eyes lit up slightly. Seeing Audrey's reaction, Bradley showed a hint of a smile and said, are you satisfied? Of course. A hint of cunning appeared on Audrey's face. All right, you two can talk. I will leave now. After Bradley finished speaking, he winked at Gerald and walked out of the office, closing the door behind him. In the office, Audrey took off her glasses and stood up. She looked up and down at Gerald with a fake smile, as if he had finally fallen into her hands. In order to not lose out, Gerald decisively chose to look back. Audrey noticed Gerald's gaze. She glared and said, where are you looking? Gerald coughed dryly, walked to the side, and sat down. Audrey chuckled and said, all right, you are now my subordinate. I order you to tell me how you saved my father. Why did Doreen and Henley say that you committed a crime? Is that true? Gerald was speechless. Then he looked up at Audrey and said, when your father was in danger, I saved him in passing. As for what Henley said, you saw Henley's attitude towards me. However, I was indeed sentenced back then. But I was framed. Details. I want details. Audrey glared at him and said. Gerald did not answer her. Instead, he frowned and asked, by the way, what did Doreen and Henley come to Los Angeles for? Gerald successfully changed the topic. Audrey pouted and said, they came specially to send me wedding invitations, and then Come here for a tour. Gerald pondered and did not say much. He lay down on the sofa in the office and then closed his eyes. Hey! Audrey saw that Gerald was lying down and hurriedly shouted. You are here to be my assistant, not to be my superior. Go downstairs and buy me a cup of coffee. I want it hot. Gerald ignored her and closed his eyes. Audrey stomped her feet in anger. She glared at Gerald and walked back to her desk. She picked up the files and started reading. Gerald narrowed his eyes at her and found that she was working seriously. He planned to have a snap. He was in a daze. Suddenly, he felt that someone was quickly approaching him. He immediately opened his eyes and sat up. In front of him, Audrey suddenly saw Gerald stand up. She screamed and fell to the ground. Seeing that the person approaching him was Audrey, he let out a slight sigh of relief. What are you doing? Audrey sat on the ground and glared at Gerald. She said, Why did you suddenly sit up? You scared me. Gerald scratched his head and said, Why did you suddenly come close to me? Something happened. Audrey hurriedly nodded. Yes, it was Hazel. At the same time, she handed the phone to Gerald. Gerald took the phone and looked at it. It was a line message from Hazel. The content was only 2 words. Save me. Ads by Pub Future. At the same time, there was also a location. It was the internet cafe she opened. Decker and the others are starting to retaliate, Gerald said with a cold gaze. Decker, Audrey said anxiously. After I went home yesterday, I told my father about Hazel's matter. My father also contacted Mr. Powell. Why did they still retaliate? I will go find my father now. Audrey gritted her teeth. Gerald grabbed her and said, Jaden's target is Hazel, and your father has already called Gideon. Jaden still chose to make a move. This proves that your father's words are not very useful. Then what should we do? Audrey's tears were about to fall. Go inform your father and have him call Gideon again. Gerald licked his lips and said, I will go to the internet cafe. They definitely have a lot of people. There might be knives or something, Audrey said. Don't worry. As long as they haven't left the internet cafe, I will bring Hazel back safely, Gerald said. Give me your car keys. Audrey hurriedly nodded. She ran to the desk and threw the car keys to Gerald. Gerald turned to look at her and said, Right, no matter what happens, do not leave here. Audrey nodded, and Gerald quickly ran away. Gerald went downstairs and drove straight to the internet cafe. 10 minutes later, at the entrance of the internet cafe, there was also a sign of suspension of business hanging on the internet cafe. 2 people were standing at the door, leaning against the wall, looking sullen. Seeing the scene, Gerald was slightly relieved. They were still guarding the door, proving that Hazel should not have left yet. He got out of the car and quickly approached the internet cafe. Just as he entered, the 2 people at the door raised their hands and said, Bro, can't you see the words on the sign? Suspension of business. Go to another place. Gerald raised his eyebrows, and then his arm suddenly raised. In almost an instant, the 2 of them felt something hit the back of their necks. Then, they collapsed to the ground. From beginning to end, they hadn't even seen how Gerald attacked. As for Gerald, he directly walked to the stairs at the door. The internet cafe was upstairs, on the 2nd floor. Just as he reached the corner of the 1st floor, he heard a sound coming from inside. Is it useful to send a message to Audrey? I already said that Bradley can't interfere in this matter. Now, call Gerald immediately and ask him to come over. The voice belonged to Decker. He gritted his teeth and said, This brat slapped me and asked me to kneel in front of him. I must kill him today. I don't have his phone number. Hazel's voice also came down. Gerald breathed a sigh of relief. Decker frowned, then looked to the side and said, Mr. Croak, there's a room behind. Why don't you bring her in first? Can you Let me have a good time after you're done. There's no hurry, Jaydan said indifferently. I told you. I will make that kid kneel in front of me and let him see it with his own eyes. Thump, thump. Hearing this, Gerald did not hesitate and directly walked up the stairs. At this time, there were a total of 30 to 40 people in the internet cafe. Unlike last time, there were more people this time, and most of them had weapons in their hands, including knives, steel pipes, baseball bats. The moment Gerald came out of the door, all the people turned their eyes to him. Gerald, what are you doing here? Not far away, Hazel was tied to a chair. She was tied up artistically. After she saw Gerald, she shouted, "Go, go." Decker grinned and said, "You wanna go? It's too late." While they were talking, a few people quickly surrounded the stairs. Decker looked at Gerald with a fake smile and said, "TSK, I was originally thinking about how to capture you, but now it's good that you have delivered yourself to my door." Gerald touched his nose and looked inside. In front of a table in the front of the bar, two people were sitting, and they were the only two people sitting. One of them was Jaydan, and the other was a middle-aged man. Gerald frowned. Obviously, this person should be Gideon. Beside him, the phone was vibrating. Gerald walked over to them and saw the word, "Bradley," on the phone. "Your phone is ringing," Gerald reminded him. When Gideon heard Gerald's words, he was stunned for a moment. He did not expect Gerald to be so calm in this situation. He looked at Gerald and said, "Bradley can't deal with this. I don't answer the phone and won't let him get involved in this matter. It is also for his own good. You should never have provoked Mr. Croak. Is his background very powerful?" Gerald looked at Jaydan and asked, "You don't need to know about my background. In short, it is not something that a bit part like Bradley can afford to deal with." As he spoke, Jaydan stood up with a smile and continued, "Weren't you quite arrogant last time?" Hazel gritted her teeth and said, "Let him go. Let him go. I will sleep with you." Gerald looked at Hazel in surprise and thought, "This girl is quite righteous. He even delivered himself to us. He wants to leave." Jaydan sneered. "When we have fun later, he will watch from the side. Just think about it. It is a bit exciting." Decker licked his lips and said, "Mr. Croak, can I beat up this brat first?" Gideon looked at the calm Gerald and frowned, but he did not speak. Jaydan nodded and said, "Sure, just don't kill him. I have to let him watch the live broadcast later." Decker licked his lips and walked toward Gerald. Gerald did not move. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he looked at Jayden's wrist. There was a tattoo there. This tattoo was nothing to the ordinary people in this world. At first glance, there was nothing special about it. The tattoo was not big. It was shaped like a real lotus. In the middle of the lotus was a dagger. It was hard to notice that Gerald was very clear that the tattoo represented the mysterious organization, Blood Lotus. This famous assassin group controlled many rich people and tycoons in the world. This time, the people of Blood Lotus came to Los Angeles and planned to attack Bradley, but they were secretive. The Night Watch only received the news and did not find their people. Instead, they lost 3 of their men. The only person was slapped to death by Gerald. Gerald did not expect that Jaydan was actually a member of Blood Lotus. Gideon should know something, so he did not dare to provoke. Indeed, Gideon or Bradley could afford to provoke the people of Blood Lotus. This organization gathered many top killers in the world. It would be a piece of cake for them to deal with an ordinary person. Moreover, Blood Lotus also controlled a lot of wealthy businessmen. When they joined forces, it would be a terrifying force. Just as Gerald was thinking, Decker walked to Gerald with a baseball bat. He stood still and grinned at Gerald. "Do you see the right side of my face? It's still swollen. I made it." Gerald smiled and still looked calm. Meanwhile, Hazel was completely out of control. She shouted, "Gerald, run. I won't say that you are scared. Just run." Decker sneered at Gerald and said, "It's good that you remember." He shook the baseball bat and looked at Gerald's hands. "Hey, you once held Kiera, and you even slapped me. I'll cripple it today." After that, Decker suddenly became ferocious. He picked up the baseball bat and smashed it at Gerald's arm with all his strength. At that moment, Gerald's face instantly turned gloomy. Gideon and Jaden's expressions changed almost at the same time. They said, "Stop." But it was too late. When Decker made his move, Gerald suddenly punched his chest. Bang! The clothes on Decker's back were ripped off at that moment. He was thrown into the air and landed on the coffee table in front of Jaden and Gideon. Poof! Decker opened his mouth and kept spitting out blood. Ads by Pub Future. "What are you doing? How dare you fight back?" In an instant, those people roared. Gideon's face changed greatly. He stood up from his chair and ran toward Decker, saying, "Decker, how are you?" Decker couldn't say anything. He trembled, and his eyes were fixed. Blood kept gushing out of his mouth, and he began to lose consciousness. Gideon's face instantly turned sullen. He suddenly glared at Gerald and said, "Brat, how dare you hurt my nephew? The first time, when he knelt, I spared him. The second time, I slapped him." Gerald touched his nose and said, "I can't spare him again and again. I gave him 2 chances. He didn't know how to cherish it. This can't be blamed on me." As he spoke, Gerald looked at Gideon and said, "Well, I'm curious. You just thought that you wouldn't dare to provoke this baldy. Why didn't you think that you didn't dare to provoke me?" Gideon had mixed feelings. Last time, when Bradley called him, he didn't mention Gerald's background. Bradley just threatened Gideon and told him not to touch Gerald. Therefore, Gideon subconsciously thought that Gerald's backer was only Bradley, and this matter involved Jaden. Although Gideon did not want to get it ugly with Bradley, he did not dare to provoke Jaden. So, Gideon gritted his teeth and offended Bradley first. Then, Gideon would apologize to him later. Gerald was still very calm when facing dozens of people. He looked at Gideon indifferently and said, "For the sake of your good relationship with Bradley, I can spare you once. Let Hazel go, and make compensations. Of course, this bald man has to stay." Jaden frowned. In fact, compared to ordinary people, Jaden could be considered an expert, but he could feel that he was no match for Gerald. This time, Jaden relied on such a powerful group of people. He felt that no matter how strong Gerald was, Gerald did not dare to be arrogant when these people were armed. But in fact, Gerald was arrogant. Now facing such a group of men, he wasn't afraid at all. If Gideon really left out of fear and let Jaden fight Gerald one-on-one, Jaden probably wouldn't end well. Certainly, when they really fought, if Jaden attacked secretly, he still had a chance. After all, Jaden was best at assassination. Hearing Gerald's words, Jaden sneered at Gideon and said, "You better think about what the consequences of offending me will be." Gideon let out a breath, looked up at Gerald, and said, "HMPH, I don't care what your background is, but in Los Angeles, it's my turf. You beat my nephew up like this. You have to give me an explanation." Gerald touched his nose and said, "An explanation? Well, if you don't send him to the hospital in 2 hours, he will die." "What?" Gideon's expression suddenly changed. He quickly waved his hand and said, "The 2 of you, hurry to send Decker to the hospital." 2/3. The 2 people came over and lifted Decker. They hurriedly ran downstairs. Gerald did not stop them. He still stood there calmly, and even winked at Hazel. Hazel was flustered at first, but when Gerald punched Decker, she was stunned. She had been practicing fighting with her father since she was a child, but Gerald's punch was completely beyond her ability. After Decker left, Gideon stood up. He stared at Gerald and said with a grin, "It seems that I haven't made a move for a long time, and the people of Los Angeles have forgotten me. How dare a brat show off in front of me? Listen, Bradley can't save you this time." As he spoke, Gideon's eyes were cold. "Hit him hard." Bang! As Gideon finished speaking, everyone seemed to hear an explosion. Just as those lackeys were about to attack, they found that Gerald moved, and the ground where he stood suddenly caved in. In an instant, Gerald had arrived in front of Jaden and Gideon. "You said to hit hard." Gerald's voice sounded in front of Jaden and Gideon. Clang! At that moment, Gideon felt a strong force coming from his head. He had no strength to resist, and his head crashed into the wall next to him, making a clang. In an instant, Gideon's head was bleeding, and he was lying on the ground. Nobody knew if Gideon was alive or dead. Meanwhile, Jaden was trembling. Jaden thought, "It's too terrifying. I'm no match for him." "Definitely not." Jaden trembled as he looked at Gerald. Jaden was very regretful. Jaden did not know why such an expert would appear in Los Angeles. "You. Who exactly are you?" Jaden looked at Gerald and broke out a cold sweat. Gerald grinned and looked at Hazel, who was not far away. He said, "Good girl, close your eyes." Hazel was stunned for a moment. At this time, Gerald's voice sounded again. "Only when I let you open your eyes can you open them." She did not know what Gerald meant, but at this time, Hazel still closed her eyes. After Hazel closed her eyes, Gerald looked at Jaden in front of him and asked in a low voice, "What's your card?" Jaden narrowed his eyes and hurriedly said, "You know us. I got Blood Lotus's blue card, assassin. You can't do anything to me, or Blood Lotus will not let you go." Gerald smiled at Jaden. "Oh, blue card assassin. Didn't you just ask me who I am? When you see Lincoln, the red card loser, ask him who I am." He knew that. Mr. Kenneth, it is you." Jaden's face suddenly changed, but it was too late. Gerald made his move and touched Jaden's waist. He pulled out a dagger from Jaden's waist. The next moment, Gerald cut Jaden's throat.